Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. We are delighted that you're in class with us today. We broadcast 2 hours from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. through 11 a.m. Central Time. If you'd like to call us, 866-582-9933. If you'd like to take us with you as you travel, we have a listen line, 24/7, 605-477-3249. Today we're going to be talking about real estate titles, boundaries, fee simple, alloidal, adverse possession. Things you need to know. With us is Guineith Isaacs. Welcome, Guineith.
Hello, Vincent. How are you today?
Very well. Thanks for staying up late in Australia.
That's all right. What I usually do is I usually have a bit of a sleep. I usually go to bed early, like 8 or 9 a.m., p.m., and then I usually get up probably about 1:30 in the morning here. And so I get the fire going and I make a cup of tea, and then I pick up the phone and I start talking.
That's great. And what kind of tea do you like?
I drink Dilmah. I don't know if they sell Dilmah in the United States, but do you know something? If you are going to be a tea drinker, I would recommend that you buy Dilmah because it's owned by, the company is a family-owned company, and it's owned by the Fernando family, who actually live in Sri Lanka, and they're old-fashioned tea farmers. They're now in their third generation. They're not a big multinational company, and yet their tea is sold in supermarkets in New Zealand, Australia, Britain, Canada. I'm not sure if they sell it in the US, but if you see it in the supermarket, please do buy it because, the tea multinationals have been some of the nastiest people out there. I'm talking about like companies like Twinings and Lipton and all the rest of them. They've been extremely aggressive in shutting down local tea farmers in parts of the world where that particular herb grows. And, Merrill Fernando has very bravely fought the tea multinationals for about 30 or 40 years. And he makes a very, very nice cup of tea. And in his each box, he has a little letter that he writes to his customers and updates them on how his tea business is going. And
what a nice idea.
It's a wonderful idea, and it says at the bottom of it, I am a CEO who makes his own cup of tea. He doesn't write that at the bottom of every letter. But I thought, what a nice touch,
Right.
And given that I'm always going to be a tea drinker, it's sort of like if you want to drink coffee, then drink Alex Jones's Chiapas coffee, because it actually supports the local Chiapas coffee farmers, or some other where you are brand of coffee that actually doesn't abuse the local coffee farmers.
How do you spell?
Anyway, there we go.
How do you spell this brand of tea?
Dilmah.
Okay. Dilma. Okay, very good.
Yep, that's good.
Today
Anyway.
we're going to talk about land titles, boundaries, secession, fee simple, allodial, and adverse possession. And I was chatting with our engineer, John, who's engineering the broadcast for us today at GCN. And we were chatting about adverse possession. And, we don't have to do that right now. But that's something that everybody needs to know about, because your neighbor can put up a fence, and it may appear to be right on the fence line. Let's say you've got, a suburban piece of land. Let's say it's a half an acre. And he puts his fence up right on the line. Well, actually, it's not on the line. It's 6 inches over the line on your property, and it's that split rail fence. And then he decides to plant some bushes on your side, and everything looks nice. It just happens to be across the line, and now he's got that 6 inches of the fence, 6 inches plus the fence width of another 4 or 5 or 6 inches. Now he's over a foot, and he's got the plants. Yeah, the bushes, and they're over like 3 or 4 feet. So he's got 6, 7 feet of your land.
Yeah, it absolutely has. And unless you go to your neighbour and say, "Oi, I'll check the survey marks, this fence line's off, and if you don't rip it up, I will," you'll lose, maybe, depending on the length of the boundary, you could lose a couple of 100 square metres of land.
Mm-hmm.
Depending, like I said, that's not likely on half an acre, okay? But if you are fencing in, let's say, 10 acres or 100 acres, and the fence line is 6 inches out, you're going to lose that land if you leave the fence there. If you go and you, at first, you must civilly go to your neighbour and point out the fact that the fence is out. Okay, and that I would suggest that you use these words, because fence line conflicts, we had an incident here a couple of years back in Wedderburn where about 2 or 3 people were actually shot, okay? I don't know if that had to do with property conflicts, but that sort of feud often starts over a fence line. So I would suggest going, first of all, to your neighbour civilly and politely pointing out that this fence line is off by 6 inches, and point out the survey markers and say, survey marker, fence, not straight, and get a line and put the line up and say, we need to redo this fence. And if he refuses, okay, then you have every legal right to actually rip up that fence and put it in the proper place yourself. If you don't, and if you leave the fence there for 10 years or less, depending on your jurisdiction, some jurisdictions it's 5 years, some jurisdictions it's as little as 2 or 3 years, depending on where you are. Around here, it's 10 years. If that fence line is left where it is, you'll lose that section of your land permanently. And you might think, well, that's not a big deal. But if you, the next time the fence needs to be redone, you can guarantee he's going to get it wrong again, and this might be in 10 or 15 years' time. He's going to move it another foot across. Get the same, and you're going to end up losing your land, quite a considerable portion of it. And this sort of conflict has to be taken seriously. When you are making up the cadastral boundaries, cadastre, for those who don't know, it simply means property line boundaries. So the cadastre is where the actual boundary of the property runs. Okay, and if you go to the corner of your land, you'll usually find a little white square, depending on where you are. Sometimes they're a wooden peg with a metal plate hammered on the top with the lot number on it. Sometimes it's a metal pole. In very, very old areas, sometimes it might just be a rock or a pile of rocks. Okay, that would be a very, very ancient property boundary. But this law goes back as long as you care to go. Okay, people have been marking property boundaries for thousands of years, and it is the single most common cause of war, both between families and also obviously between nations. Now, if you're marking out your property boundary, you need to get some builder's line, okay, and you need to find the survey markers, and you need to hammer in some sort of around here they call them star pickets. They're like the steel fence posts that you get, okay? I don't know if they have those in the US.
Yeah, we use them. Actually, a lot of times it's the rebar, R-E-B-A-R, might be a half-inch in diameter, might be 5/8, 3/4 of an inch. It's a rod that's used to reinforce concrete. Typically, for farms, what they do is they'll pound them into the corners of the property, and they'll attach a red flag. And a red flag is nothing more than a piece of plastic ribbon. And what happens is, and the surveyors will use that, and they'll tie this plastic ribbon on, and 5 years later, that ribbon's gone, and you're out in the woods trying to find these posts, and you can't find them. So if you do find them, we suggest that you mark them in a better way. Maybe put a taller fence post there to indicate that's where
I'll tell you what they do around here. They put, maybe a taller star picket or a taller piece of rebar. Mm-hmm. And what I personally do is I get an old, can from some preserves, like a baked bean tin or whatever, and I put that on top of that post. And then when I'm out and about, I can easily find it again because I'm looking for a tall post with a bean can on it.
It's exactly what we do here. Exactly what we do. And class, this is pretty important. And when we come back, I'll share a story about my grandmother and what happened to her with adverse possession. Now, it wasn't very nice. We'll be right back. So, Guineith, here's what happened. Back in the 1960s, my grandmother and grandfather's house had distinct markers on all corners of the rectangular property. And their neighbor decided to build a picket fence, 6 feet tall or so. And the neighbor very carefully put the fence, they didn't talk about doing it, they just put this fence up. They didn't tell my grandparents. They very carefully put the fence up within the markers, meaning the fence, the nice side of the fence faced the neighbors, the not nice side faced my grandparents' property. And Guineith, I'm talking about, we lost you for a couple seconds. I'm talking about my grandparents' property, and their neighbors decided to put up a picket fence, and you can't see through a picket fence very well. It's about 6 feet tall, and this was back in the 1960s.
Yeah.
The neighbors very carefully put the fence up without discussing it with my grandparents. They put it up within the boundaries of the iron posts on the neighbor's side. So everything had the appearance of being above board, honorable, and correct. My grandmother said, that's not the property line. And so we looked at it, my parents looked at it, and it looked like the fence was legitimate. And my grandmother said, right, but that's not the property line. What happened, and my grandmother was right, the neighbors removed the property stakes and moved them to gain land. They moved them over to my grandparents' side and
don't you just
attempted
take that?
and attempted to steal my grandparents' property.
Yeah.
What ensued was my grandparents got another survey, and the survey stakes showed that the fence was on my grandparents' property. by a significant margin. And my grandparents said exactly what you said. You'll have to move the fence, or we'll take it down. And and that's what they did. So you're absolutely correct. And I've seen this firsthand. And this was in the 1960s. So people have devious minds sometimes. They act with malice, and it's unacceptable.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what. By the way, I need to put a disclaimer in here. This is not legal advice. Okay, if you've got a legal problem, go and hire an attorney. Okay, but this is education, and you've got a brain. Okay, so but because we're discussing points of law here, under law, of course, I have to put that disclaimer in. Now, that's absolutely right what you're saying. But you know something? The law of adverse possession is actually there for a very, very good reason. Okay? And this is the reason why. Many hundreds of years ago, what happened in Britain, which is the home of British common law and also which is the ancestral origin of American common law, they would have massive plagues go through the landscape that would wipe out 90% of the population, okay? And you would have huge areas of countryside where you had something called intestate land, okay? Now, what intestate land is, if like I own my estate freehold, when I die many long years from now, that land will pass on to my sons, okay? And there's nothing that anybody can do about it because it's freehold allodial land. And the government actually has no legal right even to impose property taxes, but there's ways around that too, under the law, okay? Like you can sign your property over to your children while you still have your right mind, okay? Before you die or get Alzheimer's or whatever, I hope you don't get. But, yeah, or we'll discuss the reason why the adverse possession law is there when we get back from the break.
Guineith Isaacs with us. Her website is listed right at usapreparedness.com under the instructors. We'll be right back. Guineith Isaacs is with us. She's on Facebook. Guineith, how do we get in touch with you?
Okay, probably the best way is through my Facebook page, but you'll have to be patient because I don't necessarily check my Facebook page every day. I'm too busy doing other things in life. But, yeah, I do check my Facebook probably a few times a week. So, and if I see anything there, you know, anyone who really needs help, then I will get back to them. Yep. Yeah.
And Guineith, spell your name
way.
for us. Please spell your name for us so that those who
Guineith, Isaacs.
Okay, class. So if you go to Facebook and you want to find her, Guineith Isaacs, Guineith, and her last name Isaacs. Isaacs.
And you'll know it's me because there's I have a farmer guy as my icon. Okay? And actually he's a character from satire from New Zealand from many years ago called John Clark. That's his real name. His nom de plume was Fred Dagg. And he was really funny. So if you go onto YouTube and type up Fred Dagg, you can watch some Fred Dagg videos on YouTube and you'll absolutely laugh. You really will. If you've ever been a farmer, he's somebody who takes, we have a saying over here, takes the mickey out of it. You know, that means really makes fun in the best way. And he's actually quite a courageous guy these days. He's one of the few active voices that points out a lot of the corruption that goes on in the Australian government. So I really like John Clark. And he does it through humour, which is really good. And he somehow manages to get employed by the Australian ABC, which is normally I was going to say red wing, left wing, that they might as well hang a hammer and sickle from their flagpole. Mm-hmm. So, but somehow they managed to tolerate John Clark. Anyway, getting back to allodial title, okay? There's a reason why this law is there, because a long time ago, you had plagues would go through and they'd wipe out 90% of the population, and you'd have bits of land which would have nobody to inherit them, okay, because whole families would get wiped out, and by things like wars as well, you know, and, you know, like the English would be fighting with the Scottish, and the English would come through and wipe out whole villages, and, you know, entire communities would just go off the face of the earth. Now, this land would sit and would go to rack and ruin, and meanwhile there are a lot of homeless people wandering around. And you might think that can never happen again, but I urge you to get out there and look around you, because there's a lot of homeless people wandering around right now, and there's an awful lot of land out there with no clear chain of title. And it's once again going to rack and ruin. Okay? Now, this law was designed to put people back on the land, okay, so that they could begin farming it and actually do something productive and valuable on this earth instead of being a parasitic burden. They didn't have a welfare state then except for the church, but...
Okay, we just lost Guineith Isaacs, and she's going to be back with us in just a couple seconds. But we've been talking about real estate and property law, and let me just tell you a little bit about this adverse possession. There's some requirements, and in the United States, here's some of the requirements for adverse possession. It must be open and notorious. The person, and this is from a website called justia.com. It must be open and notorious. It must be exclusive. It must be hostile. Guineith, and it must meet the statutory period.
Mention that. Mm-hmm. What you must do. Okay. Yeah, and so this is what this law was designed to do. You've got to research the history of the land thoroughly before you go making an adverse possession on it. You have to find who the previous owner of the land was. You have to find the circumstances whereby they were no longer the owner. You might find that they're still the owner. Even if the land doesn't look looked after, if it's got an owner, it's not your land, okay? And if the owner is still alive, it's not your land. And if you try and do an adverse possession on such land, the owner can come and have you arrested by the police for trespass, okay? And the police can't just come on their own and do that. But the owner, if they are out and about, or their heir or successor can come along, you know, and unless they have to give you 3 warnings. But the warnings are you must leave this land, and they can be within 5 minutes. They can give those 3 warnings. And if the owner can prove their title, okay, if somebody comes to your land that you're adversely possessing and says, "Oh, I'm the owner," you say, "Well, you need to prove that. Where's your title certificate?" And you know, if they can't produce the title certificate, you've got every right to go and tell them to rack off and come back if they can with this title certificate, or otherwise you're not believing them. And you'll take them to court, okay? And you have every right, unless that owner can produce the title certificate of title, you have the right to defend that land with force of arms, as you would if it was your own property, okay? And fill in the blank there, whatever, projectile firing device you happen to prefer, or whatever means you happen to prefer, but you have every right to, by force, defend your own land. But that's what hostile means, okay? You must be open about it. Now, I'm being open about something here on USA Prepares. There's 40 acres of land next door. And after I moved here, I found out that the owner of that land had died 5 years before I moved onto this land. Okay? It was owned by the son of the people who used to own this land, and he died without leaving issue. That means he did not have any children. I have tried to find, with all my heart, his heirs or successors. I have been unable to find them. Everybody that I ask about this particular guy, they say, oh, he died, he got cancer and died. Everybody in the community says that they all knew him. And what happened with this land and the land next door was it was owned by one family, and about 13 years ago, 14 years ago, so about 10 years before I bought it, the people who owned this land were growing a hemp crop up the back, and there was a bushfire, a forest fire up the back, and the fire department had to break the lock on the gate to get to the bushfire, and they found the hemp crop, called the police, and the mum and dad both served prison sentences. The son fled and never returned. And he fled in such a hurry that he left a deposit in the toilet, which was never even flushed before he left. And he's never returned. He's died of cancer, and he has had no heir. And I have not been able to trace any other descendants of this couple. Okay? Now, what I'm doing is I'm adversely possessing the 40 acres next door. Okay? The local police know that I'm adversely possessing this land. They don't like me. Nevertheless, they know the law. They know the whole circumstances and the history of this land, and they have not interfered. Okay? Because I've got every right to take that land, because otherwise, I'll tell you what was happening on that land. Okay? There were squatters on that land who were doing things like leaving knives on our boundary in the middle of the night. Okay? Now, that is something where I'm a single mum. I live quite a distance from town, about 18 kilometres from town. The local police don't like me anyway, and I aggressively went and defended my boundary, and the homeless people decided that I wasn't such an easy take after all, and they fled. But when I woke up in the morning, I found that they had dropped knives on my boundary. And it was at that time that I decided that I was going to adversely possess the land. That's a very, very good reason to adversely possess a block of land. Okay? Because there's houses on that land, and the homeless people were squatting in the houses, and they were destroying the houses. They were breaking windows, and they were slowly demolishing them.
And how about fires? Did they set little fires here and there to stay warm?
We've found fireplaces. We've found fireplaces where they were, but they seem to be well constructed. They weren't just out in the middle of the bush.
Let's talk a little bit more about this when we come back. Guineith Isaacs is with us, and we've been talking about adverse possession, land, and taking land, preventing it from being abused, keeping squatters off. But Gwyneth, I haven't seen a single case in my life when someone squats on the land and the land gets better.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Okay, it's far better if there's somebody who actually gives a darn about it, who does things like, for instance, if there was somebody here who claimed to be the heir and successor of, the fellow who owned the land before, which, I would seriously doubt them. Okay, I would ask them to provide birth certificates. I would ask them to, provide, I would say, listen, I'm going to have to check this. And I would say, well, even if you are who you say you are, even if you are the heir and successor of this particular fellow, you would have to compensate me now for all the work and all the effort that I have put into this land to get it back into a farmable state. Okay? And I have, another thing with adverse possession is you actually have to care for the estate. Okay? So if it's got a house on it, you should try and fix the house. If it's farmland, you should fence it. You should definitely fence it, okay? Around the boundary at least. You need to put in, you should put in things like dams, bores, wells, soaks, so that when the water, when the rain falls, that it doesn't just all run off, that it actually soaks into the soil. If you want to put in things like watering points for stock, like stock troughs, irrigation systems, etc., etc., etc. The more work you can do to the land to show that you are looking after the land and attempting to bring it into production, then the higher your chances of a successful adverse possession are, okay? Because, if somebody comes along claiming to be either the proprietor or the heir or successor, you should make them prove their ID, number one. And number two, if they can successfully prove their ID through things like birth certificates, driver's licenses, passports, social security numbers, etc., 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 then if you have put in infrastructure onto that land, they have to compensate you for the infrastructure that you've put in. So stock troughs, irrigation systems, dams, house repairs, etc., etc., etc. Okay? And if you are consistent with this, over a period of years, this can get to a 5-figure sum. Then if somebody who is a fraudster comes along and says, oh, but, I am so-and-so and this is my land, you can point to the infrastructure and you can say, see this? You can't, even if you are who you say you are, you've got to compensate me for all of these capital improvements on the land. And you'll soon find that any fraudulent claimant will back off pretty quickly. Okay? If it is the genuine owner of the land, then they will either say, well, it's still my land, and but, it's something that, like I said, if you're in this situation, make sure you do your research and probably see an attorney. Either that or really make sure that you know what you're talking about before you attempt something like this. And this is education and it's not legal advice.
Guineith, thanks so much for being with us today and sharing your thoughts and experiences. And class, if you'd like to hear more of Guineith Isaacs, Tuesdays, hour number 1, right here on USA Prepares, live from Australia. Guineith, thanks so much for being with us.
Okay, God bless. Have a lovely day.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Rich Sheben's with us. His book, One New York Man's Journey to Off-Grid Living in Montana. The website, offgridmontana.com. Welcome, Rich.
Well, thank you, Vince. It's always a pleasure, sir.
Well, you know, I'm delighted you're here, and we're talking about the economy this hour and what we can do about it. It's one thing to complain about it. It's another thing to have solutions. And, you know, as I think back to what you and I have discussed on the air and privately, the reason that you and I can do what we do, live independently, or at least substantially independently, and we're not trapped by the system, and we can pretty much do as we please. That's because we sacrificed early on. We saved our money, didn't spend it with reckless abandon. We looked toward the future, and we stayed out of debt for as much as possible. And those things have allowed us to be in the position we're in now. And I'm not saying we're wealthy. I'm just saying that we're independent, and we don't have to be trapped by the system. And it's a lifestyle. It's a way of, well, heck, if you think you're going to be hungry in the next few months, you go out and you hunt, fish, and so forth, right? You plan.
Absolutely. It's a game plan of living below your means, not at your means, and obviously not above your means, which most Americans do live. And it's also a game of shooting pool and playing chess. And what I mean by that, Vince, is if you shoot pool like 8-ball and you play chess, one thing you learn is foresight. You learn to think 2, 3, 4 moves ahead, because the system is absolutely rigged. It's about corruption, manipulation, special interests, bribes, nepotism. I mean, hell, it's you have a 10 million times probability, greater probability of inheriting $10 million than you do to make it today in this corrupt system that we have. So what we need to do is to discuss ideas and solutions. We need to read, we need to research, and we need to share them with our fellow Americans. And the most important thing is that people have to realize that the powers that be, well, I don't care if you call them neocons, I don't care what you call them. There's so many different names. You have to realize that we shouldn't give up on the future, but they own the banks, they own the central banks, they own big pharmaceutical companies, they own the big corporate oligarchies who have created an alliance with big government. And that's the status quo. The status quo is basically the top 0.7% control everything. I remember just a year ago, I was reading articles where the wealthiest 62 people in the world, Vince, owned a higher net worth than half of the world. And now I'm reading it's down to 8 people. So the status quo is basically the people at the top who have an addiction to power, money, and control, who control all the things that I just discussed and a few more things, including the 6 corporations that own 95% of the media and basically prey on the low-information voter through propaganda, semantic wordsmithing, Hegelian dialectic, et cetera, et cetera. And what we need to do is figure out ideas and solutions and ways that we can control our own destiny. And Donald Trump is, what he did with the small business the other day, reducing regs, he's doing everything in his power. I really believe he has a good heart. I just don't think, and when I was on your show last week, we talked a lot about the math, Vince, and I'll be more than happy to go over some of those statistics with you, but the math, is just the probability of prosperity for the bottom 93% is getting tougher and tougher. And everything is a bubble: real estate, commercial stocks, bonds. I mean, everything. But basically, the central banks and the big banks have created bubbles, and with the fractional reserve corrupt banking, have created the greatest wealth inequities that the world has ever seen. This is why they want regular wars so they can hide the corrupt monetary policies that they've been doing to feather one's own nest. So what we need to do is talk about ideas and solutions where we can be more self-sufficient as American people, whether it be in the realm of alternative energy or gardening, raising animals, hunting, fishing, canning. And this is why I keep talking about this, because it was chapter 15 in the book. However, people are not controlling their own destiny, Vince, and they're getting, the probability is getting less and less. And 69% of Americans don't even have $1,000 in savings. And this is why we got to start basically looking for people who's going to not represent but stick up for the middle class, because it's waning dramatically, Vince.
Rich Scheben, many years ago when I was in the banking world, as an officer of the bank, I was hired from one bank to the next. And one of the banks, one of the credit card banks that employed me, was willing to pay me about 25% more than my peer at J.P. Morgan, or my peer at Chase Manhattan, or my peer at any of the other big banks. Not only were they willing to pay me more, they were willing to pay almost all of their employees more than the other banks were paying. And at first I thought, wow, what an honor. They're willing to pay me more, a lot more, which meant that I could afford more. I could afford a newer car, or a new car, new clothes, bigger house, new house. And what happened was almost every single one of my coworkers, regardless of position, whether they were above or below me in terms of the hierarchy there at the bank, almost all of them bought a bigger house or a new car or two, for their spouse, because they could afford to do that, because they were being paid 25% more than the competing banks were willing to pay. And then what happened was very interesting, Rich. The bank said, it's 37.5-hour work week. But they would give you, when you first started, they would give you enough work that it would take 40 hours if you were really good to get it done. Then 45, 50, 55, 60. So they could pay you 25% more and get way more work out of you than they were paying for. And the reason was that the employees became voluntary slaves to the bank because they overspent. They lived at their means, which was 25% more than they could get if they jumped ship and went from the bank that employed me to J.P. Morgan or Chase or any of the other banks. They were literally trapped. They would lose their house because they could no longer afford their house, because they would have to take a 25% or more percent reduction in pay. And that, I think, is what you're talking about, living below your means. So when I looked at the parking lot where the officers parked, they had all these nice fancy cars. And in one of those parking spots was an older Chevrolet El Camino, half car, half truck. And that was mine. So I drove a truck to work in a suit. And the other guys drove these fancy sports cars and fancy new, cars that were at their means. But if their means changed, they were in trouble, financial trouble. And I have a feeling that that's the kind of thing you're talking about.
Well, everything is rigged against the middle class guy and the poor, because they're living off of beer money, and a lot of middle class are living off of beer money, which isn't even keeping up with inflation. And you could make the argument, well, we're in a deflationary spiral, and we are. But it's because the baby boomers are retiring, and I just read an article the other day where there's a 59-to-1 ratio of share dumping versus buying stocks. 59-to-1 ratio. Think about that, folks. I'm also reading articles where the GDP for 2016 was at least negative 1%. Well, what we get today from the old media is propaganda, because we're really for the middle class, we're in a hyper-stagflationary situation. If you think because deflation is happening that that everything is going to go down in price, I got news for you. Things are going to go down in price that help middle-class equity, like in regards to retirement, like home ownership, you bet. But if you think food, rent, college tuition, art, stocks, real estate, insurance, taxes are going to go down, that's not the case. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to go up. So it's stagflation. Basically, the best way to look at it is a double-edged sword from both ends that cuts the middle class chance of prosperity. And everything is rigged for the big corporations, for the oligarchies, because they've created an alliance with big government. You remember a couple of years ago, Nestle was paying $524 for a permit to extract 27 million gallons of drinking water in California, where at the same time the California state government was saying you can't drill any more wells, and they were stopping wells, and they were saying there's too many straws in the water. Everything is made for the big corporations. I was reading an article the other day, Vince, where big corporations, they basically have risk-free profits in the sense that they can go out and buy loans and get loans with no money down, sell most of their business, pay off their loans, have still a lot of business left over for profits from doing nothing. And they can sell bonds, pocket profits, buy back stocks. The big banks are basically fleecing the average Joes while the rich are getting richer, Vince.
Let's talk about that more when we come back. And just one more example of that is when companies get sold, they can avoid the warranties. We'll be right back. Rich Sheben's with us, and we're talking about the middle class, and we're talking about slavery, voluntary slavery, financial slavery, slavery that we put ourselves into by agreeing to debt instruments. Rich Scheben, I think, I can't prove this right this moment, but I believe that what happens in corporate America is there comes a time when companies can't seem to sustain the warranty claims. They become a liability that is pretty significant. And what they do is they put themselves up for sale. The new company buys them, and then the new company says, yeah, we don't make that anymore, that particular model that you're talking about. We make one just like it, but not exactly the same, different warranty. So the warranty is no longer valid. Have you experienced anything like that?
Well, sure. I mean, we have different countries making suboptimal products
Absolutely.
made to be disposable. We have companies who are no longer, some might be a wholesaler, some might be a distributor, some might have sales, some might not, and everything is being outsourced. And it's almost impossible to even find decent customer service today. In fact, it's funny you mentioned that, my long-distance carrier went out this morning. And I'm emailing to somebody, and by the sounds of her name, sounds like she's from India or something. I have nothing against other cultures or other people, but we're in a situation where we have this aristocracy versus serf. The left-right paradigm, Republican, Democrat, forget about that. So what's happening is you have the people who own the businesses who are doing everything in their power to just feather their own nest and create their own profits at the basically making everybody else disposable and not creating skill sets and really making this inequity between the wealth, the haves and the have-nots wider. So that takes down, as long as we agree, folks, to not drawing a line in the sand and saying having zero tolerance for political correctness, if we agree to having the same a different tiered system of rules, laws, and accountabilities based on what group you're in, the quality, the accountability, everything will decrease. We have to have the same rules, laws, and accountability because we're eliminating everything that made us great. Because when you reward mediocrity for years and years and years, you eliminate productivity, ingenuity, innovation, knowledge, and you're really insulting the work ethic, the ability, and the intelligence of all these people who were shoved in these groups and saying, okay, we need to lower the bars of standards and expectations for this group and this group and this group because they can't compete. This is an insult. This is degrading, and this continues to degrade our whole society. And we need to, it's about raising the bars of standards and expectations. But see, as long as we keep the Fed and central banking and big pharmaceutical companies and the big corporate oligarchies, and they have protectionism from this system, things won't change. And this is one of the reasons I talk about buying a piece of land and doing things like family land transfers, like boundary line adjustments, selling a piece of land here and there, building greenhouses, building structures, and doing it together so you can combine capital resources, skill sets, machinery, and get different people who have different skill sets, and then make it a job. And 5, 10 years down the road, you sell that piece of property, and everybody makes money. Everything's on paper. You got to have an end game, because we're getting to the point where there's not going to be many jobs left in America, folks, because all you hear about these days are things like robotics, automation, and artificial intelligence. It's going to get to the point where everything's going to be outsourced, because we've had so many years of people complaining to human resources, oh, someone told a joke, or someone complimented me on my attire. Well, all this baby, safe space, snowflake, cupcake, microaggression stuff is coming home to roost, folks. And the powers that be are not going to want to hire anybody anymore. And we're heading towards very difficult times.
We'll be right back. We'll talk a little bit more about stagflation. Bert Shealy's with us, and we're talking about stagflation. And class, stagflation is like it's a double whammy. It's a period of low employment, meaning few jobs, few people employed, and rising prices. So the things that you need to buy seem to be more and more elusive, because it appears that the money that you need, you don't have, because there's fewer jobs. But employment is stagnant and prices are rising. Is that how you'd characterize it, Rich Scheben?
Yeah, basically how I always call stagflation is prices are rising while the economy's sucking wind. Okay?
Yeah.
And basically
sure.
you pretty much outline that. And folks, it's so important when you hear about, MSNBC, CNN, ABC, CBS, all these the old news media, they're all bought and paid for. Fake news is synonymous to bought and paid for. Okay? They're owned, these 6 corporations are owned by these very wealthy people that I outlined earlier in the show, okay? And they are controlling everything with propaganda, professional wordsmithing, Hegelian dialectic. They have an addiction to power, money, and control. They're going to do everything to distract them down and divide the American people by groups. Now, look at reality here. I talked a lot about math in the last show, and I don't want to go over too much repetition of what I talked about last time, but look at the young generations. All these behaviors are designed by the globalists. A different set of rules, laws, and accountability based on what group you're in, safe spaces, snowflake, cupcakes. Females who are mothers can't even be called mothers anymore because it offends transgenders, crying rooms, complaining to human resources and supervisors because of a joke or a compliment, microaggressions, people who are so upset they are excused from taking exams. Folks, 80 years ago almost, we had 18-year-olds storming the beaches of Normandy. Savings rates down, investments rates down, debts up, not just government debt, but household debt as well. When the middle class goes, people, freedom and liberty goes with it. We're giving a globalist, non-elected people the ability to run everything, from the oligarchies to big governments to the central banks. A good example is the EU, the European Union. When you have a big entity with top-down centralized control by people who are addicted to power, money, and control, okay, and it's top-down, very few people are going to get a chance to have a say. They're not going to have a microphone. The smaller the entity, like, for example, the EU breaks up and each country is independent, there's going to be a higher probability of the little guy being able to hold the microphone and say what is going on. Look at all these protesters. Do you think they're real protesters? Most of them don't even speak. They hold signs that Trump is fascist when he's trying to do the exact opposite and break up the big corporate oligarchies and reduce government size. That's what fascism is, folks. It's when big corporate oligarchies have merged with big government to create more regulations and eliminate this little guy from controlling their own destiny. So these protesters are being hired. There's ads all over Craigslist and all over newspapers all over the country. When you're paid people to destroy personal property and be violent, you know what that's called? That's called mercenaries. And what Trump needs to do is create executive orders for sedition and treason. I'm all for demonstrations, but when it gets into violence and destruction of property, that's called being a mercenary. And what we need to do is all read, research, and basically fight against this aristocracy versus serfdom relationship. Again, the left-right paradigm, Democrat, Republican, forget about it. That was all fake. It was all phony. It was a veil to create a disguise so you'd be distracted. And what we need to do is talk about ideas and solutions that has worked for different people that's going to create your own control of your own destiny. And we don't even have, if you think you have control of your own destiny, go to the supermarket. GMO foods aren't even labeled anymore, people. I mean, they're doing genetic engineering to eliminate the antioxidants that fight cancer, tumors, and make you healthy, okay, in GMO foods. You don't have as much control as you think. And then there's the money printing, the bailouts, the bail-ins, negative interest rates, confiscation, QE, stimulus package, electronic money, silver, gold, crime, the COMEX selling out, cryptocurrencies, world reserve currency, our dollar. We have nepotism, bubbles everywhere. Folks, we don't have as much control as we think we do. And this is why we have to all start thinking outside the box and sharing ideas and solutions. But they have to be backed up with objective facts and not subjective emotional opinion, because that's what's been running our country the last 10 years. We can't run a country based on distracting, dumbing down, and dividing the public, okay? These social programs have a law of diminishing returns, and we've passed it a long time ago. We have to come up with real ideas, real solutions, and President Trump needs to create some type of department, which I'm anti-big government and anti-regulation, but we need to have middle-class representation, Vince.
Well, I totally agree. Rich, as you were saying these things, I was thinking, how many friends do you have who totally agree with you, who literally follow the kinds of things we're discussing here and implement them? And I dare to say it's very, 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 very few.
You know, I'll tell you, nobody's right 100% of the time, and no one's agreed with 100% of the time, because there are so many different wild cards, and there's a different situation for different people based on what family they're in, what their net worth is, capital resources, education, intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. But I'll tell you something, because with me being on the air for like the last 4+ years, and the book and the talks I've given, I've had a lot of very intelligent conversations with people who are a lot smarter than me, whether it be in front of hundreds of people or in back rooms. And people are waking up. And I think there's a huge divide between the low information voters and the people who actually do some reading. And the internet has offered us an opportunity, folks, to get basically objective facts from the new media and real news instead of all the propaganda which is designed to sway public opinion. So I can get on the internet, and in 3-4 hours, I can read 150, 200 articles. I read 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day, depending on the day. And I can get a lot of information very quickly, where back in the old days, you had to wait for the television to give this propaganda, and then you had to read between the lines or read the newspaper, which was designed to do the same thing, because they're all owned by these wealthy people, these six corporations who are designed to keep the aristocracy serfdom relationship. So now I feel that, there's a lot of good sites. If people, since we're talking about economy, if you want some really good sites, folks, besides usaprepares.com, I'd go to zerohedge.com. I'd go to usawatchdog.com with Greg Hunter. Gerald Salante with trendsresearch.com is a good source. There's a lot of good sources, altmarket.com. There's so many. Start with zerohedge.com, and that'll take you to different areas. And if you understand some of the things that they talk about, and there's so many things that's up in the air, there's so many different opinions. And keep in mind, if you hear of something that's, this is going to happen, this is a great investment, I guarantee you by the time it gets to the public, it's already been tapped out, okay? As far as you're going to be one of the last of the buyers, which means that you're probably going to lose money. The aristocracy, the powers that be, are going to get the information first, okay? And I would be really careful on where to invest these days, because it's most people who are at the bottom of the totem pole, like the bottom 93%, the system is designed for you to be the gambler, and you're going to lose most of the money, Vince.
Well, I totally agree with that. When I was in Virginia, I used to get these cold calls from investment firms, and these guys would call me up, and they tell me about, they got my name, and they were calling me to let me know of this fabulous investment opportunity with returns that were just staggering. And I would say to them, so where'd you get my name? Oh, I don't know. Somebody gave it to me. It's on a piece of paper. They could never tell me where they got my name. And then I would ask them, so how old are you? And they'd say 27. And I'd say, I'd have to be out of my mind to invest my money with a 27-year-old who has no idea what hardship is, who's led only a privileged life, who has no idea what sacrifice and depression, meaning a financial depression, like 1929 style depression, is. Especially somebody I don't even know. Especially someone who can't even tell me where they got my name from. Thanks so much. Goodbye. You're right. You're right. And these types of calls came from boiler rooms. They'd have a list of names and numbers, and these guys would be told to call and fleece the people on the other end of the phone and extract money from their savings account and put it into risky investments for which they were paid a commission. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Well, look at...
And I wanted to share something else with you we talked about, and that's preparing. We talked about the job interview, and job interviews are pretty much few and far between for good job interviews. And you talked about research and the old days when you go to the library. I want to share a short story with you when you come back about preparing for a job interview and how that worked out. Rich Sheben's with us. OffGridMontana.com. Rich Sheben's with us. Rich, when I graduated from the university, I was in the position that many young people were in, looking for that first job after graduation. And what typically happened back in the 1970s is you'd create a resume and a cover letter, and you'd send out like 100 of them, hoping to get a nibble. And I thought about what most people did, and I decided that was really not the right answer. So I had the potential for a employment interview, and I went to the library, kind of like what you talked about, what we used to have to do back then. And I went to Standard & Poor's and Moody's and news articles, and I researched the company where I had this potential job interview to see if it was worth my time and their time to drive out there and meet with them. And I liked what I read, and I took some notes, and I committed them to memory. I knew the company, it was a manufacturing company, and I knew the product lines. I knew who the vice presidents were by name, what their area of responsibilities were. I knew the number of employees year after year for, let's say 5 to 10 years. I knew the sales revenue and the corporate culture. And out of the gate, I had this one-on-one interview with the personnel department. And the interviewer, asked me why I was there. And what I did not say, Rich Scheben, was, I need a job. I never said that. I said that, after I explained what I knew about the company, I said, I'd like to become part of this company and help the company grow. A little more discussion went on, and within probably 45 minutes to an hour, I was given a tour of the company. I met some of the department heads, and I was offered a job on the spot. And what we're talking about is research, being prepared for opportunities, being prepared for the things that may come your way so that you can make the best of them. And that's one of the things that we'd like to teach in this class. And that's what you're talking about. You're talking about going forward. It's going to be tough, and you need to be prepared. And it's not always easy. And some people may think that it's a waste of time doing that because, spending 3 days in the library preparing for a possible interview is a waste of time. And what many young people think is that they should start out being president of whatever that company is because they deserve it. And there's not much that can be farther from the truth than that, Rich.
Well, and this is one of the reasons why the elite and the powers that be and the big oligarchies are going towards things like robotics and automation and artificial intelligence, because they don't want to hire people anymore. They don't want to deal with the liability paranoia. We don't have a rule of law anymore. We have things like affirmative action and quotas. It's not designed to create equality, fairness, tolerance, and diversity, but it's designed to divide us and create anarchy and infighting. And we have to stop saying, what's the Fed going to do? What's the IMF going to do? Because everything's a big hedge fund. Everything's speculation. We got to start saying, what are we going to do, folks? I mean, you look at the derivative fiasco, $1.5 quadrillion. Come on. The whole globe can't even come up with that. That's 26 times the global GDP, for Pete's sakes. Then you got China with their development bank. They're competing against the COMEX. They're already in the IMF basket of currencies. And what if we go with the SDR situation, basket of currencies? The U.S. dollar value is going to drop probably by 50%. Folks, there's so many things that are speculative today because common sense and logic has been replaced by corruption, manipulation, and political correctness. So you got to ask yourself, what can you do to control your own destiny in the realm of food, in the realm of lifestyle, in the realm of entertainment, in the realm of equity, in the realm of possible retirement? Everything is up in the air right now. 90% of people live in urban, suburban America. What if we decentralized and people moved out into the country and learned skill sets and regain those lost 19th century skills, but dovetail them with 21st century technology? I think happiness would go up because there's no direct correlation with increased GDP and happiness for the bottom 93% of Americans. Vince.
Well said, Rich Scheben. Offgridmontana.com. Class, above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you.